Hello, I am Seamless, and today is Wednesday, which means it's time for a new viewer track review video. Today's gonna be a weird one because my left ear is stopped up, and it is making me feel, think, and sound and hear weird things, but that's okay. I hope. Let's find out. Coming up first, we have Static Charge by Fusekit, which has labels. Interesting. What are those? Actually labeled. Cool. Oh yeah, I probably should say this before I start. If you want to have your tracks featured in one of these videos, what you do is you head on over to the Discord channel. That's in the description. Yeah, that's in the Discord of this channel. Yes, it's in the description of this video. And in there's a specific like little chat channel for submissions. And there's rules there, plus the mods will help you out to make sure you can do things like actually have your track, picked because you have downloads enabled, which is required so I can like download it. That sort of stuff is sort of what that's for. But yeah, when you go ahead and do that, you'll have a chance, and then you'll end up in here like one of these. And I have been stalling because I'm trying to find there it is. Okay, good. Anyway, let's see what this sounds like. Okay, so this is the most by the numbers mix I've ever seen. This is definitely like one of those keeping it -6, keeping it that way kind of deals. And like I don't really have a so I in the past I used to liken doing this kind of thing towards trying to expand like a 480p thing to a 4K thing, and like in reality you want to have the loudest louds, like the highest resolution at the source and whatnot. And that's true, but the actual like damage that does is not even close to as noticeable as like the pixelization and visual media is. We're not that sensitive most of the time. To the point where doing this kind of thing is just up to you. Like if you like coming down and going up on the master versus just coming down on the master. It's those two types of strategies. As a premix goes, what I mostly am going to comment on is mostly just the arrangement of stuff. Like the stuff is cool, it sounds cool, it feels good, the music's right. It's not that it doesn't drag so much. It's just on the very precipice of dragging. It's very beginning of dragging. Like this is like the maximum length this content could possibly be, to the point where I might even shorten some stuff just to up that amount of engagement a little bit, so that like you're not just going you're actually kind of like a bit, because you're not stretching it out as long as physically possible before it starts to overstay itself. That's kind of how most of this feels, but it still doesn't do it. It still doesn't overstay itself. It's still good. It's doing its work. The thing is though, is that a lot of this will change when you master something like this. You can kind of, that looks like sidechaining. I hope that's sidechaining, but I don't see any other kind of sidechaining most of the time. Most of the stuff just feels like it's on top of itself. And which is to say, if you are doing it and your goal was to be transparent, you did the hell out of that. But when you go to master this and then you go to compare it to other things that might have more impact or not, and you're trying to wonder where or how that came from, it's mostly because it wasn't their version of this was not so tightly packed in the mix like this before they brought it up to the master. On the other hand, if you can get it this tight and then master it and get there, then yay, you did it. Congrats. But that is pretty much the question, since this is pretty well perfect. Like as far as mixing goes, not so perfect that if you were to give this to a mastering engineer, they'd be like, "Oh joy, I don't need anything." Like they'll still push this, and they'll still notice things at mix level that you could not have possibly noticed without just knowing how this was going to sound once it gets pumped up, which is a lot harder than it sounds. So again, just kind of up to you there. But I dig the style a lot. It's sort of a backgroundy, like Massive Attack type style. Like the people who made the original house theme, not the one that's on the one on Netflix now, but the actual original one that's not there for some reason. Licensing. Grr. Anyway, coming up next is a folder I closed. Nope, there it is. B period with sci-fi sounding thing. Haha, allowed. I wonder how loud this is going to be, because I didn't actually notice that track was that quiet until I actually looked at the waveform and was like, oh. And now that I know that, it probably means my particular playback is way too loud. So I'm just going to, in fact, turn myself down a bit before I do this. Yay. I'm also going to note the time when I start this. Yay. a dope ending. This was very Bruce Falconer meets Muse, and I dig it. So I'm going to use this as an example of a sort of a suggestion amendment of a strategy I usually suggest when writing something like this, or most things really. Like this, I feel as though, what's happening? Oh yeah, still playing. I feel as though like this main bit you got, which is great. Like this progression and the modulation and the whole thing is awesome. I love this song. Like the mix was definitely like this focus. Like this is the bit that you focus to make feel right. And it does. It feels awesome. And the issue is that like all the things that are in here that are also the things that are here that don't include all of the things feel very alone when they're not explicitly full of the other thing. Which wouldn't be a huge deal if it wasn't such a huge chunk of the song. It does a pretty good job of making this actually feel quite a bit more high frequency focused, which is good because this track is extremely low frequency focused. Just in real terms, it's a lot. And the kick is also just lost in there. I do like the glitch. Good job with that. It's just an old favorite of mine. I dig it. A lot about how this is written is about how I write stuff. And like I mentioned Bruce Falconer and Muse, like two very large inspirations for me. If you don't know who Bruce Falconer is, Google that guy and see the list. It's pretty 90s. But another sort of continuation of that style and the progressive-ishness that like I got that informed a bit how I would do things like this was mostly video game soundtracks. And there's some funny stuff about things that are soundtracks, because the way the most of the pool of them that inspired me to make kind of a musical in a sense are not the kind. I've never like found them and listened to them by themselves for more than a few minutes, mostly because my entire consumption of them was mostly with other media, and that was enough. Or they were already real songs, and I had them already. Like there were a couple cases of like PS2 or PS1 era soundtracks where because you could just put those discs in CD players and play the soundtrack, and they'd just be songs. Like Twisted Metal soundtrack was really fun. Point I'm trying to make that was that like the Half-Life 2 soundtrack is my big one, and a lot of that music was mixed the cinematic way, where it feels like it has power, but it doesn't actually have the literal power. And by literal power, I mean things like this kind of extreme presence in the sub being this present the whole time. And like the root notes of your notes being the things that you're hearing more than like the air of them. That's like, this is the real power. This is us using actual power to feel like there's power. Versus the cinematic methods, which are all like all the side chaining and EQing, all this magic to really make it feel like you are doing this, but without having the literal presence there, because this is where all the booms are and dialogue and stuff like that. It's mixed like that. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because when it becomes an inspiration and then you go try to do it yourself and you don't know this, or you don't approach it with that in mind, you end up doing this literal thing, and then it becomes difficult for it to have the kind of presence that the source did, because it didn't. It was fake in the terms of that it was designed very cleverly to hide where its power was so that it didn't overpower the stuff. And when you actually listen to it by itself, you do that. When you go find the OSTs and you just listen to them, you note that like, yeah, this is not a lot of like power, and not even arranged in a way that feels like they would make sense in like a music consumption sense. Like what instruments are present, which ones have the loudness, which ones are the focus, are not what you expect it to be. Things like the ticky-tappy things are like the lead elements now, and that's because like that stuff cuts through. And like what's interesting, to kind of a segue, I was when I was trying to figure out Hans Zimmer type things, and I went to do the 2 Steps from Hell sound. They were big on that too, and it's this sense that like we can hear those clicks, and if we hear the air act like the air acts when it gets hit by big things in concert with those clicks, our brain fills in the gap to say there was some huge impact that followed it, even if it was none of that ever happened, and that lets us do things like fit power in songs that's not there. It's really kind of complicated stuff, and it was. We're talking about kind of old things, and they were doing this because they had to, and they came up with incredible magic to like make that stuff work. That we mostly just take for granted as things we could just do now. Things like just sidechain whatever you want, wherever you want, whenever you want, as fast as you want, and you won't tell if you don't want to. It's really kind of great. But that's what you need to sort of do. to kind of translate this from having a lot of like the literal straight up power. If you want to feel that way, I'm couching all of that in a lot of ways that are about my desires for songs like these. I hope some of that made some sense for you, or for anyone who makes that kind of thing, who wants to make the kind of thing that's any kind of way I do. Other than that, though, there's not really anything wrong with this. It's kind of fluttery in the timing, which I normally chalk up to compression, like your compression timing. Like you can make it a little bit faster for these bits, especially when there's more higher frequency stuff. But also, if you backed up the rest of the other stuff with more higher frequency stuff, you could make that one snappier too. That's why a lot of tracks have a lot of high frequency, like just white noise everywhere. You just have those swells happening constantly in the background, and then artifacts from going too fast are just hidden completely. And it's a good way to just maintain a kind of it's pretty basic, if you ask me. I don't like doing it, and it's just a personal problem, because it is very effective and everyone does it and people like it and no one else complains but me. So, take that or leave that. Coming up next, we have BenJIII. I assume those are eyes. I guess I could copy this in caps if I really cared that much. Underground. I like the mystery. Oh man, that is so quiet. That is so quiet. Oh, I've been to it, but like you guys are being real delicate today. I wonder if that was I almost want to normalize this. Like, I don't even know how loud this is. Whatever. I'll listen to it as presented. Here we go. Hello, headphone users. I'm speaking quietly. I'm back now. I'm coming back. Hello, hi. Wow, that was really quiet. It got even quieter. It's still going. Can you hear that? Like, wow. I really hope that this was a rendering error, because that thing I said before about the 480p thing would absolutely happen to this. This, like, I just looked at the MP3. It's still going. I just looked at the MP3 size of this, and it occurred to me that, like, the way that compression tends to work is that it doesn't store values that don't get used. So, like, if you're not using most of, like, the bit depth, then it's coming out a tiny file. And if you try to increase this, if you normalize it, it's gonna come out bit crushed. That's what the effect essentially is, bit crushing. That's what happens, because we're fitting not a lot of bit range into a larger bit range. We're basically expanding the lower bit register. If I were to like, I just said banana this up. I'm not really sure how that applies, but whatever. Like if I did that, like, let's observe a little, see if we can even see. So rendering errors, like if you just like have certain values too low, like, so here's what this is. This is normally. It looks pretty well together. So this should totally have been a rendering error. I want to see if I can, like, so you do this, and then if I control edit, bam, like all of this error, like move difference in area and position and all that was still what was there in that same area of range. But that same area of range was only that much, like sort of gridded space. And now you can just sort of imagine that grid just got zoomed in and stretched out to fit this much space. It's still, like, wouldn't be as obvious a thing. It, like, this had plenty of high frequency sort of stuff happening, so it's not like it'll be a tremendous travesty, but like we wouldn't hear the noise so much. But if this was like a dark, clean thing that was actually delicate and had a lot of area on it, it would kind of scream a bit. If it, again, because sometimes some people do take that -6 dB thing kind of far, and they go, why not -12? Why not -24? And that kind of stuff. And like, neither. So operating on the assumption that that was not designed to be that quiet, this is a pretty good in general, honestly. Like, it traveled, progressed, had a groove. It was exactly it. Like, other than the fact that it was hilariously quiet, it was pretty well a good representation of what it is, like, as a thing. I can't tell if there's appropriate sidechaining or power representation or not. I just cannot tell. It's just the nature of the fact that this is 2 dB. Cool. Moving on with this. Where's my downloads? We got Hubani, one of the moderators in the Discord, with the track Explore. And he basically told me to be unkind towards the mix and the master for this track. So let's get serious, ladies and gents. And we see this has appropriate levels. So also prepare your levels. And I'm playing. Here we go. Wow, this is very Spore. And that is what I'm going to use to compare this to. So, excellent about arrangement. Pretty much all the content, the sound design, pretty much beautiful. So I really, even if you didn't ask me to, I pretty much only would have mixing and mastering to discuss. The bit I want to focus on, as you probably guessed, is going to be about compression timing, sidechain, and power and weight ratios of the sub and stuff. So let's talk about it. In a phrase like this, a bunch of stuff has to happen between notes in order for notes to sound like notes happened. And it sounds like I'm going to say that we want to clamp down on tails, have space and negative space and that kind of thing. But I just said that we are comparing this to Spore tracks. And on the last album that he put out, there's a lot of tracks that are under Spore. And actually, Feed Me Too, there's a lot of tracks that are like this, that have lots of this exact amount of overlapping quality in this level, in this frequency range. But they still do the things between notes that are needed to happen to make them feel that way, that they are in fact different notes that they're in between. And it's basically the compression stuff. And sure, yeah, the negative space is a good shortcut for this. Negative space, like where like there is actual definitive air between when notes happen, so that you can tell really when a thing ends, but also you can tell when a thing begins, because headroom is not just about how much louder we can get everything when it's all added together. It's also that if there's an amount of tail left over in a certain thing, and you start there's an amount of level happening, which means that there's less room for you to travel. And the travel is what feels good. The travel is what we understand dynamic range to be. How far up and down did the amplitude just go? That's the thing. So when there's overlapping that goes on, the issue is there's less room now because it's already been a little bit on its way. Negative space obviously is a nice direct just the cancellation of that if you just go for it, but that is still not the quality, because those tracks I've referenced and are talking about the Spore stuff, like they again have that overlap, but they still have impact. What's up with that? Well, about the travel, it's still about this, because now it's about things like, well, all right, when the kick hit, it sidechained and it broke some stuff, and that's cool. And when the snare hit, it sidechained and it broke some stuff, and that's cool. But when the notes hit, they just kind of on each other, because they don't do the things that the kick and the snare do. Presumably, if you're doing the whole release time automation thing, it might be doing that. Or if you're just doing regular sidechaining, it's doing that. But there's other automation we can apply here, because if you really want to really like nail it, what you would do is that you would have a little bit of automation on the release time and master for every single time one of these main basses hit. And if I had to like rule it, I would say you would do it every time the bass, like the sub itself, hit. Because that's something that a lot of the Spore tracks kind of maintained a lot, is that when the sub came on, it had a power. And it's about like the same basic idea. Like if there was nothing playing and you had a couple of moments like that. Like where's one? Here's one. Nope. Over here. Where'd you go? It was a nice little bassy bit that was primarily like the low frequency thing. Like it was a good little dive. Why can't I find it? It was like blinding as day when I saw it happen. There it is. Like stuff like that. Like how do you make these individual hits actually have a hit? And a little bit you can see sort of like it happening a little, but then like I'm sure however you made that happen, it wasn't as in control enough to secure the type of impact you wanted to have reliably. And that's what we're talking about. And that's how you like the kick and the snare. You just maintain it. And if it has something this powerfully low involved, it could probably be ruled to have that effect applied to it. And it should just be a sub that's your separate thing, and that's what you're doing to do that. If that would be like, at the beginning, I just noticed all these loops in here. Those aren't loops. It's just what that looks like. It looks like there's markers, but those aren't markers. That's really weird. There's no markers, but out here it looks like markers. That's kind of freaky. That's incredibly high frequency presence that wasn't enough to trigger my like, oh, that's too high. I did notice that it was pretty high power. I noticed that much. There's a little bit of that like separation amount. So because again, comparing it to Spore stuff, a lot of the times the better solution is to have the negative space, have the dynamic range. But if you have all the overlapping, then you still have to find ways to make it like have the presence of impact, while still relying on the reality that you're going to hang around at the 0 dB and not really have the room to do the impact you want. On the other hand, there's a couple of artists that like to do the pre-side chaining, especially on the kicks and snares, where they'll have like I do it time to the hit now, so it's a lot harder to do it that way. But if you separated it into actual automation, you could just offset it kind of, so it starts off that way. And the value of that is that if you could guarantee before the kick hits that absolutely no level, like it's 0 level before it hits, then it will be every time as loud as it could possibly be. And that's pretty epic. And that could be true for anything. That could be true for anything that you're like, this really only sounds good when it's by itself. You can literally mandate that to be the truth. But you have to mandate that like coming up into the hit, because nothing will react fast enough if you make it happen at the hit. It won't be like, okay, this sample like it's off. There'll be amount of like power carryover, like kind of whatever. So you got to really dig in and make sure that like, yes, it's off. It's been off for like enough time that none of those oscillations are left over. And it means we're getting pure, clear, perfect like impact on the first nature. And that sounds away. It feels kind of cool. Lots of Zomboid tracks do that kind of a lot. It's neat to look at. You can tell it happens when you see a track like this, and you can literally see big old black empty space right before it hits. Anyway, that's all the stuff I would recommend changes about how power is handled in this track, because otherwise a lot of your instincts are pretty spot on. So good job. I did that. All right. Also, this guy does really good work as a moderator in my Discord. I'm very pleased. Moving on with Reality from Zac Oran.
Until something's proven empirically, epistemological concepts, whatever your conceptual ideas, they have to make a juxtaposition with reality someplace, so that you know by empirical evidence that what you have said was reality is tested to be reality and proven to be reality. Juxtaposition with reality.
Right now, we're inside a computer program.
Is it really so hard to believe? This is the world that you know.
Well, that was awesome. Okay. I really appreciate the super amount of time between this bit and the first drop. It's a super hard thing to do a minimal kind of breakdown-y thing from something high energy and have it not feel like a potential letdown. Like, people do it all the time and do it well. They make it so it's not like that, but it's hard to do that. So good job, because this was effective. This just kind of like... really was, it seriously made the mood work. And then when it came back in with actual high energy, this was really cool. Everything about this is really neat. What would you call this? I feel like if I called this industrial, I might be right, but if I were to search for industrial, I would not find this. So some adjustments on my genres are required. It's a fun thing all around. Like, it's hard to be all that. There's honestly not a lot of like errors even with an adjustment for like a genre I might care about. Like, I can see the sub being kind of moving around, but there's nothing competing with it. It's not causing irregularities in the high end either. Like, its motion is steady and regular and intentional, and everything else seems to be its way too. It's very good. It's good. Good job. Zac Oran. Moving on, we have Overchug. Excellent name. With Siva. Is this going to be more of that? Because I'm ready. yikes. Mostly because loud. This was actually a pretty dope track. The sound design would be cool if the high frequencies weren't as loud as they were. So your roll off was actually right. Like you're where you have your peak and like how high it is. Well, not necessarily how high it is, but where the peak is relative to the rest of this stuff. Like that's the correct kind of like do that, but it's just too loud. It's just way too loud. It pretty well, the whole of it up there should be less than what like the peaks are on everything else. Like a lot. It's just it grates. That felt physical, you know what I mean? There's probably be a bit of overcompensation happening in your listening from something in your listening environment that's not getting you those frequencies. That makes you think you need more of those frequencies. Because like these guys had almost the right amount of frequencies, but were still kind of high by themselves. But this was just too much, way too much. But like the hit, the impact, the burn, the groove. This was a cool track, and it was mixed well to boot for everything except the high frequencies. So pretty decent job overall. Moving on, we have Soundtrack for a Thing by SixSided. Oh, this looks explorative. Okay, so I dig the hell out of this because it reminds me of Batman, and not Dark Knight Zimmer Batman, but 90s, the Batman animated series. Batman, the animated series. Almost got it right. That Batman. That's wah, 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 wah. Like, listen to this. It's so perfect. Like, man, you have a handle on this. I don't know what you were looking at or trying to do or getting, but you generated this, which sounds par with things that were like Emmy award-winning professional level work not that long ago. So, damn, good the hell job. Did you be like doing stuff? I don't know, like, you know what I mean? You should be doing stuff, man. I got nothing to say about this from a technical perspective. Like, it's also genuinely mixed like it too. Like, a lot of the modern ways of doing, like, basically it's not super different from this, but here's some huge differences from the modern versus this. You hear all those notes and chords and things going on in there? Like, that's not a lot of, it's not even really a dig on modern people being like, oh, they simplify things. No, they go for power. And we all know that power is about phase cohesion, and different notes means less phase cohesion. So octaves and fifths and harmonic stuff means power. And that's a lot of the main modern approach to writing and whatnot. And like the mixing of it is sort of pointed in that direction. And you could tell because there's so much more bass in the new stuff. And I don't just mean like they have sub frequencies, like a separate sub or something. Like you hear the bass instruments so much louder than you ever did in orchestra based settings. The like contrabass and tubas and trombones and whatnot, like they generate low tones that are generally represented, but it's hard to mix them in there and have them compete and not phase with actually like dense sort of possible chordal things. What's a lot of fun about orchestras is that before, DAWs, an orchestra was basically a DAW, and like the music theory was basically the sound engine, and it was expected. Like, and this is why like conservatories are like military schools. Like you're basically training yourself to be a plugin, and you're expected to like get an input and output a thing that a composer knows so well that they don't even need you in the room to write the thing because they know exactly how it'll come out, and it's not actually their fault if it doesn't. Like that. That kind of crazy precision allows people to do things like sound design with orchestras, where your choices for harmonic things is not just about what notes you're choosing, but also like different types of instruments and whatnot that do different kinds of stuff in different parts of the harmonic spectrum. It's basically old world sound design, and that like comes across in the ways that it can be mixed, and in sense of like how they pay attention to how things are like weighted and powered in a way they know that they're going to be captured, that they are going to be captured. Which is why this, like, I think is a big reason this actually comes out to sound like that. And you like, there's also a big difference between how like, more Japanese, like the orchestras in Dragon Ball and in Miyazaki stuff, like that style of whole presentation is also a different kind of like a sound design approach, but it's all the same instruments, with some additions and subtractions. Most of that's true for most like kind of regional appreciation for things. I don't know what the heck that gigantic tangent was, but point is that this track rules, and it is exemplary of the style that was basically in demand at the professional level for the things as something as epic as Batman the Animated Series. Good job. It's also the last one we're playing today, and I guess that was the whole big old talk about it. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And as usual, have a nice day. Later.